think. Okay, y'all are seeing my screen okay? Yes? Okay, great. All right, welcome everybody. We have, this is Emily Anderson. I'm in the director of the Career Center, and Courtney Fain is on. We are the folks that support consulting on the Career Center side, and we have some of our Owen Consulting and Strategy Club members, well, actually leadership here. So Caitlin Wilson and Matthew Barber, do you want to wave? Everybody sees you guys. So, so we're going to be talking through what to expect as you start onboarding and the support you can get if you're investigating consulting as a career path. So these are things we want to talk about today, and certainly if you have questions, you can, Courtney, do you want to monitor the chat?
Sure.
Perfect. And we'll try to answer as much as we can. So what we wanted to talk about is what your career support here is here at Owen for consulting, what the MBA firm or the firms that hire MBA talent in their consulting organizations, what they're looking for, what recruiting timelines look like, where do people go, so what offices do they work in, and how do you get there, and what you want to start thinking about now in preparing for recruiting. So with that, we'll start with who we are. So I'm sure some of you have already engaged in some of the other sessions we've done over this summer and have seen our faces, but I'm Emily, and Courtney is also there and waved earlier. So you'll be getting to know us throughout the rest of the year. And then here are some very important people to you. These are leaders in our Owen Consulting and Strategy Club. So Caitlin Wilson. Caitlin, you want to say hi?
Hey guys, looking forward to meeting everybody.
She's currently on her internship. I would imagine she's probably taking her lunch break right now. And Matthew Barber, Colin Costello, and Scott Russo are a very important team that are leading case prep. So Matt, you want to say hey?
Hey everybody, looking forward to meeting everyone as well and getting started on the case prep.
Great. So we also want to introduce a concept. You've probably heard a little bit about it, but we do have onboarding coaches or peer coaches that the CMC utilizes. And so you will be getting introduced to that cohort sometime during orientation. So you will have a peer coach that's assigned to you. They're loosely based on what you've put into surveys around where your career area interests are. But it's a whole cohort of second-year students that are here to help you on board and answer questions. So you'll hear more about that program, but we just wanted to reinforce that there's an onboarding buddy for you coming your way. So now we wanted to talk a little bit about what firms are looking for in consulting. People are coming into consulting with so many different backgrounds, and the firms do look at a wide range of candidates. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about that. And Courtney, if you're comfortable, I'd let you chime in because you hear this directly from recruiters all the time. But basically, as a consultant, you're there to solve problems, but you're solving problems for clients. So it's not just about how smart you are. It's also about how well you communicate, how well you're able to develop client relationships, maintain the relationships, and represent the firm at client sites or virtually the way it is right now. But you are the face of the firm. So as far as what consulting firms are looking for and how they evaluate candidates, they take all that into consideration. So that's why the recruiting process tends to be rather long and involved in that they're evaluating you on both capacities, your ability to go in and interact with the client and understand what their problems are, and your ability to help them solve it. So the recruiting process will reflect both aspects of that. And with that, the way they are evaluating you as a candidate, they're looking at your past experiences and your past skill development to let them know, or to give them an indication of how well you would operate in the world of consulting. So it's not only how smart you all are, but how have you applied it in the past? What projects have you worked on? How have you been able to deliver results? How have you worked within a team-based setting? How have you had to lead in a setting like that? And then how well can you communicate? And then they're evaluating you on your personal presence as well, because you will be representing the firm with the client. You are the revenue source for the firm as they're dealing with their client. So one of the things that I've often found helpful, especially at this time of the year, is just to go straight to company recruiting pages. So you can look at the various consulting companies, whether you're looking at Bain, BCG, McKinsey, Deloitte, EY, PwC, KPMG, or maybe a specialty firm. Many of them, in fact, most of the large ones have pretty well developed MBA recruiting pages. Some of it is very salesy. They're going to talk about where the firm has to offer, but you'll also get a sense of what they're looking for in candidates, and sometimes they will actually have some really good material to help you start thinking about preparing. So they'll start updating all their sites. In fact, I'm sure they've probably already updated most of them now for the upcoming recruiting season. So that's a good place to start. Courtney, do you have anything to add with that?
No, I would just say, as you all are looking at consulting, I'm sure you understand that the case prep is important, and you will have an opportunity to learn how to do that and walk through examples with the OSCC. But remember that it's also your presence and how you communicate and write and facilitate the ideas that you're developing. So experience in managing others and being in front of clients will help you as you prepare to put yourself in front of these practitioners.
Yeah, and Caitlin and Matt, do y'all have anything to add with regards to how you felt you went through the process last year and what the firms were evaluating you on?
On the process side, I can weigh in there. I think that the process seemed a bit like unknown to me coming when I was in y'all's position a year ago, like thinking like, what all do I have to do and how do I navigate this? Because I'd never done a case type interview or like a formal recruiting. I had always done it from the network base. And so I guess my main point on the process itself would be that, like, in my experience, the process at Vanderbilt was like highly organized through the consulting club in the school. Even my kind of information sessions with companies and the interviews and everything was highly facilitated through Vanderbilt. So it wasn't like I had to be going out on my own and making a lot of connections in the consulting space. That was kind of facilitated through natural networking and natural prep. And then on the evaluative side, I think that one really, I think you guys hit everything here, and the kind of point specific things start to get a bit more detailed when you like look at firm by firm. And those are things that you start to learn throughout the fall. And then once you also kind of officially have your interview scheduled, people are very hands-on about wanting to know, like, where are you interviewing and how can I help you, and make sure, like, think about this and this and this. So I wouldn't, that part comes later.
Yeah, I completely agree with Caitlin. The one thing I'll add to the evaluative side, if you come from something like my background's engineering, it's really, really focused on analytical chops like they've got in the second last bullet point. If that's the case, really focus on some of the other bullet points here. So the ability to lead, or interpersonal skills and communication skill sets, things like that, that you might not be able to demonstrate on your resume. Those are really important to make sure that your interviewers and some of the practitioners get a good sense of.
Matt and I intentionally came today for you guys because Matt is operations engineering and I was public relations. So we could not have more opposite backgrounds, and interviewed on 90% of the same places and had our offers at very similar places. So all paths are welcome.
My screen seems to be stuck here. Oh, there it did. Let me make sure. Okay. All right. So that was a good segue because we were talking about career switchers and how they are just completely prevalent in this recruiting process. You won't see as many ex-consultants recruiting in consulting. I'll just leave it like that. I'm sure it's lifestyle. But anyway, you will be asked to demonstrate stuff from your previous work experience, and you'll be asked to translate things from your previous work experience into consulting. They will get that not only from an interview, but even before the interview. Consulting is one of those career paths that has an informal networking process that will help you get on interview lists. Any job or any career path that is working with a client base will often have networking as a component of the whole recruiting process, because that is an actual part of the skill sets that are necessary to be successful in that career path. Some firms will weigh more heavily on the networking process than other firms. Some of them will have that at the forefront, and other firms are going to ask you to demonstrate your problem-solving ability first and then go through the networking process. So it's not always the same at every firm, but it is something to take into consideration, that you will have to network as you are applying to all of these various firms. And things that they will be interested in is you being able to translate to answer the first question: why do you want to be a consultant? Consulting is one of the areas that many MBAs explore. Not all, but a large portion of the MBA population does explore consulting. So the recruiters and the alums and the people that are responsible for hiring in those firms are used to dealing with many MBAs that are exploring consulting. And so they hear this, they talk and ask the same questions over and over again. And they usually start out with, why do you want to be a consultant? And that is harder to answer than you might think on the surface. You really need to have thought about why you do want to be a consultant, because it needs to resonate. It needs to be honest. It needs to be authentic to you. And it also needs to be a bit of what they want to hear as well. So being able to think about what in my past has led me to believe that I want to be a consultant, rather than there's an MBA dartboard and I'm throwing darts against the wall and it lands in consulting. I'm like, okay, that's what I want to do. That's not a good enough answer for them. It needs to be much more targeted to what about your experience, your personality, your drive, your aspirations leads you to believe that consulting is a great career path for you. And that's part of this whole first round of development, is coming up with how to answer that one question. And again, I'm going to kind of lean on some of our recent interns this year as to how they came about answering those questions, because I do think that is an important thing for you to think about beginning right now.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Thanks. I was going to hope you go first on that one. So she's absolutely right. I've probably answered this question no less than a couple hundred times in the last year. So it's definitely really important to get down, particularly for the interviews. The way I really looked at crafting it was I wanted to find a blend of my past experience and some of the skills that I had from both, problem solving side, analytical side, and leadership side, and also kind of blend it with what my future career aspirations were. So I wanted to get more away from the specific operational manufacturing component of my background and start seeing a broader spot of the supply chain and focus on more complex problems that go across different departments, whether it's finance or human resources or other adjacent departments. So that's really how I looked at it. It was pretty simple. It resonated with most of the interviewers, and it really just kind of matched who I was and what I wanted.
Thanks.
You'll get asked at at every firm, your interview at some point will say, why consulting? Why this firm? Why this office? Like that is just, by the book, you'll always get that. So it's helpful to be prepared. One thing that I remember being at this last year, and one thing I did that I thought was super helpful for me was I went through kind of in my little bit of time off work and did some reflection around what did I like about my past work and what did I dislike about my past work and what did I kind of want to fill as gaps. And I used that those areas during a lot of my networking to kind of pressure test around people. Do you feel like you are doing a lot of independent work, or do you feel like it's highly interactive, to try to kind of see what people said about their work? And then by kind of filling those gaps, I was able to feel a lot more concrete about my actual answers when it came to interview time, because I could kind of coalesce around, here's what I like about what I've done or what I'm looking to do, and here's kind of what I've heard firms say and how that matches up. So take some time now to reflect and kind of think about where that stands for you now.
Thanks. Courtney, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, I was on mute. I would agree. I think it's really important to realize that a lot of the consulting firms are excited by varied experience. So don't look at your experience as not applicable. There's a way to tease out things that you've done in your past to put towards the consulting career. It's just developing words around that and your story and spending time on that, just as Matt and Caitlin are saying.
And I think the first way to really get a sense of it is to engage and ask questions. So at the beginning of this process, I think your goal should be to find out more about what it is like to be a consultant. You can, even in your own network, if you know, if you have friends or family members that work in consulting, it's good to ask them, just get their take on what's important, what skill sets are utilized most often, what experience, what makes a good consultant. Because if you have a better base of information, it can help you as you think about what your own experiences have been and what your aspirations are, because the whole goal is to be able to communicate this. And this is not a bad exercise to have to go through, because for the rest of your career in many, many organizations, applying for new positions or putting yourself up for a new area in an organization, or even if you're looking outside into another organization, you're going to have to go through the same process. So the more you understand about what, and I hate to use a good consulting term, but your own value proposition is, will help you. But the only way to know what your value is to understand what they value. So those are questions you can ask right now to anybody in your own network. And certainly as we get into school, you'll be tapping into the second years in the alumni base for things like that as well.
Yeah, and to that point, a lot of the prep that is done around consulting is applicable to other areas. So I know y'all are gonna have goals, but things might shift and change, but the prep that you're doing is very applicable to other areas. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Emily, there's also a chat question that I sent you.
Oh, it's about GMAT score. Yes, that's always going to be a question. So that's something that in the past for certain firms, GMAT's been a determining factor. And when we say that, it's mainly MBB, McKinsey Bain, BCG. Some of the other firms will factor GMAT in with other things like your GPA, your work experience, your interview process. So it depends a bit on the firm, but I do think that the MBB firms will still largely look at a GMAT as a they'll have a GMAT floor somewhere around 700. It's hard to get a firm to actually commit to any given number based on the candidate, but just on average, that tends to be where they are. For the other firms, especially for round 4, where you may not have a GMAT, Courtney, have you had conversations, because other schools have gotten or have candidates that don't have standardized test scores too? Have they offered any guidance yet on that?
Yeah, I think the conversations around hiring are still sort of at a pause as people are really figuring things out from a company standpoint. But you will find that there are firms that historically haven't looked at them, and so things won't change. And the one thing to remember, and I'd say an example is PwC, KPMG, EY. But one thing to remember is that a lot of the folks who are round 4 or don't have scores are in the same boat as a lot of other folks who are at other schools, which is in your favor. So norms might change a bit this year because norms no longer exist. So I think MBB will hold as they have been, but things will change outside of that, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's our best guess right now, given any other guidance that we've gotten from firms. And now with that, we can talk a bit about timeline. So from what we know right now, the timeline will likely stay the same. The methodology of interaction will be virtual in the fall. We don't know if interviews will be in person or virtual come January, February, and I'm sure that's largely based on where we are with COVID. But up until then, the recruiting process itself will be virtual, according to this timeline. Now, we expect, and we're already hearing from firms, that they do want to have multiple touch points with students. So it's not just going to be an information session. They'll have other coffee chats or other touch points, whether it's the consulting symposium or another, virtual trek or something, a combination of both of those. There'll likely be multiple touch points with firms, but we will not be traveling over the course of fall break because they're not going to want visitors at their companies, and we will not be able to facilitate an actual visit. But time frame, I think, will largely stay the same right now. So I'll let maybe Matthew can talk a bit about engagement with the case interview training, because that will begin once school starts as well, and see what the time frame is for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be relatively unchanged from last year. The biggest change for us is we used to host all of these in person, and this year it's going to be fully virtual. So we're really working through right now some of the details about how we make sure that we have the same quality of engagement and give you the opportunity to really learn like we did last year. So that'll start. Our first Sunday night session will be right around Labor Day weekend, and then we'll have a regular cadence of Sunday night sessions as we kind of go through the different aspects of the case interview. And from there, we'll open up the first year and second year case prep virtual portal of some kind. I guess we'll have to do it over Zoom this year. Last year was generally in team rooms. So again, another detailed workout. We're going to kind of take it one day at a time, but really just focus on that opportunity to have the same experience and be as prepared as possible.
Great, thank you. So as far as application timeframe goes, we're still expecting job postings and applications to open up late October, December, or November timeframe, with applications due largely the beginning of December, and interviews will happen in January. Any update on that, Courtney?
No. To my knowledge, the consulting firms are really sticking to the timeline that they have done in the past. I think for some other companies, things might be pushed back in light of the current COVID situation, but to my knowledge, this has not been pushed back, and everyone's numbers and projections will probably be more solidified by August, which is great for you all because you'll really know what things will look like.
Thanks. And so this is just a visual to let you know when offers are extended. So we do have some early career fairs for those of you that have thought about going or attending virtually. MBA veterans reaching out, and to a certain extent National Black, although National Black tends to not be consulting heavy. I think out of the national career fairs, reaching out tends to be the one that has the most representatives from consulting. And so those will be in the October timeframe. And there's a percentage of the class that have received offers by the time January comes around, but largely the interviewing season is January into early February with the firms. And then this is just an offer source. Everybody fills out a survey. So this is based on Owen information over the last 5 years. And so on-campus recruiting, it was on campus. It's going to be facilitated through our system. So we have to think of a new term for on-campus going forward. But basically it's postings that are dedicated to Owen and interview slots or interview processes that we facilitate with the firms. Some are job postings, which are we would host on our system, but then the companies do their own interview process outside of our system. And then there's a few that have been based on referrals, either alumni or faculty, or some that have gotten theirs through these off-campus national career fairs. And here's the locations, and I've highlighted the ones in white of companies that are rising second-year class or the class of 2021 where they're currently interning. And you can see it is across location. And I know many of you over all of these years, one of the big questions that is always asked is location, because most of the large firms have multiple locations across the US. And it depends on the firm as to how they source and place their interns and full-time into the various offices. And it's usually based on forecasting capacity. Various firms have different ways of doing that. I think on one end, you have Bain that tends to recruit at an office level. And Caitlin, you can talk about that if you want to. And then there's other firms, PwC is an example of a firm that really does their capacity planning at a nationwide level. And people tend to be able to go from office to office. Matthew is at Deloitte, which I believe is somewhere in the middle on that. And BCG tends to recruit on a regional basis. So it's a bit across the board. I will say on a completely macro level, firms have gotten a bit more open with location than they were, say, 5 years ago. So there's been more negotiation on actual full-time office location than there was, say, 5 years ago. But it does depend on the firm, and it does depend a bit on what their own capacity planning model is. So Caitlin, I'll let you talk a little bit about Bain, because it is much more of an office-to-office recruitment.
Sure. This is something I didn't fully understand when I first started into this, but the way that firms recruit is largely based on like how they staff cases. So you'll hear Bain, for example, and some other firms do this, have like a home staffing model. So they try to staff you for your team you're on with other people who are in the same office, and you're working probably on a case that's within the kind of geography. So for the Atlanta office, like would be in the Southeast most likely. For the work you're doing. So for example, if you were at Bain and you wanted to work at oil and gas, you probably would not go to the New York office because that work doesn't exist there. So the pro to that is less travel, working with people in your office. The con to that obviously is you're, kind of tailoring yourself into a region, and recruiting for an office specifically, and office level hiring is exactly that at the office level. On the flip side, as Emily mentioned, that some firms have a lot more flexibility because they staff across offices. So you'd be working with people across different locations, and then you're all kind of traveling different places, but that creates some more flexibility. I would say, I guess, that regardless of kind of where you end up, I think Emily made a really strong point of whether it's your full-time offer or whether it's afterwards, just being a virtual intern this summer and hearing from people's experiences within Bain, and I think would be similar for a lot of firms. People who tend to stay with firms over kind of a long course very frequently have worked in one office and then transferred to a different office or done an assignment in a different office. So over the course of your career, it feels highly flexible, even though I know when you're thinking about that immediate post-MBA role, it might be a bit more kind of specific.
Courtney or Matt, do y'all want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, so we actually just had this conversation with Deloitte about an hour ago with all of the Owen alumni, and yeah, really similar situation. It's kind of all in flux based on COVID. Like we've had a couple alumni that are in Atlanta that are right now in New Jersey and in Chicago, and everyone's just kind of all over the place, and no one has a great answer as to what it's going to look like in a year. But there is some flexibility before everything happened. We've got grads that have an easy way to transfer to whatever office they want to go to after the internship, whether it's Denver or New York or Chicago. So there's a lot of flexibility there and a lot of firms that are similar to that. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're recruiting if that's something that's really important.
Yeah, and I would echo all of those comments. And then also, this is for a little further down the road, but transparency on both ends is appreciated. As you're walking through this process, you might receive the question of where are you looking, what office would you be looking at, and you just want to be truthful, but then also realize that this could be a 1 to 2 year commitment, and then they could be more open to you changing offices, to Caitlin's point. So regardless of where you are, it would be a great experience, but then realize that they want to make you happy just like they want to fulfill their need. So be transparent about your interests.
If I could make the Atlanta case really quickly, since a lot of the recruiting out of Owen does tend to be focused in the Southeast and many Atlanta offices, 2 nuggets that I did not think of to start. One, a lot of firms have similar pay no matter where you live in the United States. That's pretty similar to a lot of firms. So if you just think of that tactically, you can have a lot better life in Atlanta than you maybe could in other locations. And 2, Atlanta, I think, is a great office to start in for a number of firms or Southeast offices in general, because you are not recruiting into an office where there's a huge MBA program right there locally. And so your intern classes tend to be much more of a melting pot with people from a lot different programs, which I have personally found to like, because you're getting a whole diversity of people versus 14 people from one school who is in the same exact city.
Yeah, those are good points. And I will say too, that you have more leverage negotiating on the full-time level than you do on the internship level, by and large. And you do your best negotiation is to do a really good job as an intern, and they want to keep you. And then you can maybe be a little bit more specific about where your full-time office would be. However, I think the thing to know is to be smart about knowing where they need people, where your best chances are. I do generally tell people that coastal offices are highly desired for many people, and there's more MBA schools in those coastal offices in and around, if you're thinking San Francisco or New York or Boston. So not to say you couldn't get those locations, but they will generally have a lot of people that are vying for probably limited slots in those locations. So here's some things that we have coming up that you want to keep on your radar. So they will be virtual. So we have Mark Cosentino. He's an introduction to casing. He'll be available on August 18th. These things will be in the evening after class time. And then we have Deloitte already booked in for early connections. That'll be on a Friday. David Orval does Crack the Case, and he's scheduled for September 10th for marketing cases, and then Crack the Case 1 and 2, which is a broader case prep on Friday. There's still some dates that are up in the air because we're having to move to a virtual format. So the club fair, the internship fair, and the symposium will be getting all of that information out as closer we get to orientation. And then we are, and I'm telling this to Caitlin and Matthew because you'll be hearing a lot more about it. We have switched our recruiting system this year to a new system that's got more features, bells and whistles, and it's also interconnecting with outcomes. So all of the events, workshops, job postings, contacts, all of that stuff will be in our new system, and you'll be introduced to that in early August, sometime during orientation. And so look forward to that. Courtney, Heather, we've had an exciting summer switching systems. For anybody that's done a software implementation, you'll know what we've been doing. So so it's all, things are getting moved over and configured up. So we're excited about it, and we're excited to get it over with too. So. And then one more thing I wanted to throw out there, and you will have access to this right now. So we have a great set of librarians and a great set of resources with our Walker Management Library. And they've put together research guides. The link is below. You with your VUNet ID will have access to this. So it has a consolidated list of resources that might be helpful to you as you are either exploring consulting or preparing for interviews. The top thing is O'Reilly for Higher Ed, and our librarian Kelly LaVoice will be doing a session on July 28th on library resources. So I encourage you to join in on that, because that has a lot of resources, online classes, books, and tools about learning how to use some technology that could be helpful to you as you move into consulting. If you've not worked in Tableau, if you don't know Python, don't even know what it is, there's all sorts of fantastic information that's readily available to you right now to do some online classes to get your tech skills up to speed. Brian McCann has put some recommended books. He and Megan Lawrence are teaching our strategy group, and Brian is he is a faculty sponsor for the Owen Consulting Club. So he's put books in there. There's also different databases to do industry research. There's vault guides on consulting. And for those of you that have not gotten familiar with Microsoft Office products, so Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, there's some good instruction on that as well. And finally, we'll be adding the link for Rocket Blocks, but it's a case starter for specifically for consulting and product management. So we have a subscription to Rocket Blocks, and we'll be giving you access to that too. And you'll use that as you begin to prepare and practice for casing. And there's a whole other list of resources that the Consulting Club has. They are the owner of the casebooks and have a lot of really great information, and you're going to want to join the Consulting Club. No matter what you wind up doing, I can guarantee you that being a member of the Consulting Club will be helpful in interview prep and just getting ready to use all the information you're going to get in class and how you can apply that to solving problems. So I can't recommend strongly enough joining the Consulting Club. Anyone have any questions? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask if you would like.
Could y'all talk a little bit about the structure of the Sunday night sessions?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one. So that's definitely a good question that we have a few things to work through. Generally, how they've worked in the past is they're a 90-minute session hosted by myself, Colin, and Scott, and we're just going to break up the entire case interview process into 5 more palatable chunks. So we'll start with, what is a case, the types of cases you're going to see, frameworks that you can use to apply to the cases, some of the charts and graphs and math and different aspects of the case that are used to kind of solve them. And then finally, some more behavioral problems. And through that, we'll have small homework assignments to kind of slowly build our way up to getting to a full level of case proficiency. And like we talked about earlier, start turning it over to where you can have some of these one-on-one sessions to really master those case skills that you need for the interview process.
Matt or Emily, do you have an answer to Anshul's question?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something we'll talk about in the Sunday night session. There is that you kind of want to go the opposite from a generic framework. They want to see some creativity and some ability to solve problems outside of the box while using kind of some analytical rigor and some kind of structure to your thinking. And that's something we'll dive into. So for right now, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just kind of keep an open mind as we go into it and absorb the different frameworks and types of cases we go down.
You'll see as you kind of go through, if you decide to go through the consulting case prep kind of process, you'll see from what Matt and Colin and Scott present, and then in addition, the speakers that Emily and Courtney talked about, so like David Orval coming and a few others, you'll see like the same exact kind of background framework, but you'll see a lot of different ways about going at it. Everyone kind of puts their own style at it. And so what's important is to kind of understand the fundamentals, but then put take what works for you, because it's not necessarily that you have to take every single thing that each of those people are saying, but make it kind of work for you in your own way.
Yeah, I'll add one thing that you just mentioned there. If you have no idea what we're talking about when we say case interview or anything like that, I was in the exact same boat when I watched this presentation a year ago. I strongly recommend going to Mark Cosentino's on the first week. I left that meeting being pretty terrified that I had no chance at consulting because I was pretty blown away by everything he was showing us. So it's a really good first touch to really understand what we're talking about. And when you go to it, don't worry. We're going to work you through the process. We'll explain it in a lot more detail, but highly recommend that.
Yeah, and I'll just highlight, Matt, you referenced, so you go through the Sunday night prep for 5 or 6 evenings, and then the second years open up one-on-one case opportunities. So you really get to hone how you think about certain problems and not just in a group setting. So that's something really helpful that you all offer.
We were literally emailing a group of us second years last night about some cases we saw, and we claimed dibs on some cases to give you guys. We're very excited.
And right now, if you're just trying to figure out case interviewing, you can just Google case interview, MBA case interview, and there's a lot of online demonstrations. And they do vary widely from very hypothetical, kind of crazy ones to ones that are much more aligned with a problem that a firm is currently working on. So you'll kind of get a sense, and basically the whole idea of a case interview, or how you're evaluated with it, is your ability to think systematically through a problem or issue and recommend next steps and a way forward to a recommendation or an ultimate solution to the problem. So they're looking for clarity of thought, as well as some originality. There's a second order of expectation with regards to what a firm is looking for. Can you solve a problem, but can you give an original insight? If you can give an original insight, then those are highly prized, and but that usually comes later, like in second round interviews. But ultimately, that's your goal, is to be able to structure an answer to a complex problem, and then hopefully give them something to think about, the interviewer something to think about as they go forward.
I have a question in regards to the competitive nature that y'all were talking about. I know Matt and Caitlin, you both mentioned you had several offers, but how would you recommend kind of managing expectations on, if you can actually get a consulting role, and manage your time as far as going for consulting while, kind of looking at a backup plan at the same time?
I think that's really fair. And Emily and Courtney would probably advise everyone to have a diversified plan about how going about this. In my personal example, I was kind of interested in a few different paths, and it wasn't that they were all the same, but I kind of went down the consulting path. I had a separate interest in kind of going down some marketing paths, so applied for a few of those. So I did have kind of, multiple things kind of going at once, and then decided between them. The process of going through case interview prep was applicable to all of them. It was just applicable to my MBA in general, like just super helpful, but was also applicable to like just being sharp and smart and all of those things. So that was a helpful thing to kind of have going on in the background while like going to different kind of information sessions I was interested in my actual applications ended up being for one of like a more finance LDP program, one in marketing, and a number in consulting. Does that help?
Yes.
And I think that's pretty similar. Emily, Courtney, you guys can weigh in here, but I think that everyone tends to have, some scenarios.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely a backup plan. And we tell this to students every year because, there are more full-time jobs in consulting than there are internships in consulting. And so because it is competitive, especially if you're coming from a non-business background and you are needing to develop some experiences with a business function, marketing, operations, finance, it's good to have a secondary plan because many people re-recruit in second year and wind up getting a full-time offer in consulting. So we'll talk individually to students about that. I did see a question about the distinction between MBB and other consulting firms, which is I try not to say that's a good question because it gets overused, but anyway, that is a good question. And I think the distinction is blurred a little bit over the years in that pay has gone up in all of the firms. MBB tends to lead with it, but there's so much collusion in the pay ranks that to get competitive talent, most of the firms if one firm ups their pay, the other firms up pay. MBB may pay slightly more, but it's not substantially more than the other firms. And I think, historically MBB has been focused on strategy cases or strategy engagements. And I think, by and large they are, but a lot of firms have gotten, have strategy practice areas and, are playing in that same, playing in the same sandbox basically with MBB. There is a distinction between the legacy accounting firms and MBB because, it's kind of, to me, it's somewhat similar when you think about pure play investment banking versus commercial banks that have an investment banking arm. There is a client base that comes with accounting firms and they can, they are separate. The accounting side is separate from the consulting side, but there's that. So there's a breadth of types of engagements that the legacy accounting firms are involved in, some of which are in technology implementations, a lot of things around people, so people and change. So there's a breadth of engagements. So I think, to me, the distinction has gotten less over the years. There's still a bit of prestige associated with MBB by name and out in the marketplace. But I think as far as work that you do, I think there's been somewhat of a blur as to what's distinctly MBV versus what all the other firms are that have general consulting practices. There are some firms that specialize in particular sectors. Like for us, we tend to get that with healthcare. So there are those that have specialty sector areas. But I mean, I would be interested to hear what Matthew and Caitlin have to say about that, because they recruited for both and got a firsthand look at perhaps what they might be able to distinguish between the firms.
I think you hit a lot of a lot of those the type of project, the type of work, a lot of that PD is very similar across the board. Mm-hmm. The one difference I would just to like kind of double click down on what Emily said around specialization, that if you were someone who, really is interested in finance and wants to do financial consulting, or really interested in healthcare and wants to do healthcare consulting, there are more opportunities to do that at some firms, which let you kind of specialize early. And if you've been spending the last 6 years of your career in healthcare and want to stay in consulting and healthcare, that makes a lot of sense. And if that's the case you want to do, there's probably more opportunities to do that within the like traditional Big Four versus like a BCG or Bain that would make you they do much more generalist for your first 3 years, and you're intentionally exposed to a lot of generalist model. So I know for a lot of people in our class, that was like a personal fit that people kind of played around with.
Yeah, I think the other part of it is really the preparation side. I would say for whether it's BCG or Bain or Deloitte or EY or PwC, the preparation is pretty challenging. The cases are all of a pretty equal level of rigor. So from that aspect, I think that kind of shows that the qualifications and what they're looking for a high level of talent. So I don't think there's a huge separation of talent there. And as far as the people that you network with and the people that you meet, I had positive experiences with just about every firm. There are great people at all of them, really talented alumni that come from here that go to all of them. So like they said, the gap's closing, and it's really good either way.
One thing I'd mention, if we don't have a question right now that is maybe of use to you guys, I know we've talked a couple of times about like reaching out to second year students who have interned in different practices, or kind of starting your networking when you get on campus. And if I was you, that's one thing I would ask: how am I supposed to do that in a virtual world? So as Matt said, we're trying to work on a lot of things to make them kind of work virtually, including training. But one of those things is even to just help you guys like start to have exploratory coffee chats with just other Owen students that are really informal. So we're working on getting a list together for you guys of like, here's people you could reach out to in the class who are happy to like hop on Zoom for 15 minutes and chat. So there will be things like that coming out once that first week. You'll be getting all sorts of emails.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Anybody have anything that they're interested in knowing now, or? Well, if that's it, thank you, Matthew and Caitlin. It was great to have you on, and Courtney, all your insight. And we look forward to, interacting again very soon. And it's all coming up really quickly. We're less than a month away. So anyway, we're looking forward to getting to know you better, and we'll be sending out additional information as you get closer to orientation.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks.